Welcome to the second morning session in this room. They will be introducing themselves, but this session is Forget What You Know, Experience as Inoculation Tactic. Do you want a time warning, or have you got it all set?
Maybe give us a 10-minute warning.
10 minutes. Do you want to leave about 15 for questions?
Yeah. So 10 minutes before.
I'll give you a quick,
Thank you all for coming at the early morning session. We're going to use this slot to talk you through the journey that we've been on collaborating together for a few years. And we've been working on creating a playable, immersive experience about systemic dehumanisation, which is inspired by research into the history of the Holocaust. What do we mean by dehumanisation? We mean the process that allows us to stop being outraged by the victimisation of a group in society and to see it instead as permissible or even justified. So it's basically this process that happens and it creates a bystander society where you see violence and you think maybe that's something we have to live with, maybe it's, even if you're not supporting it, you think maybe it's just part of society, or it can even make a bystander into a perpetrator. So this is the process that we're interested in. Can you click for me? Thanks, Dan. So introducing the team, I'm Ellen Pilsworth at the University of Reading. I've been working on a book project that explores how contemporary observers understood Nazism at the time. I've been focusing on British observers, and so I've looked at the way that first-person accounts by refugees from Nazism, how these accounts were received in other countries and how they were translated and shaped. So I've been exploring how ideas about who Nazism's victims were played a role in people's understanding of Nazism. So who are the target groups? How do we feel about those target groups? Is this a problem? This is the question I've been asking. I'll pass on to Dave.
Hi, I'm a colleague of Ellen's from the University of Reading. I'm a professor of contemporary literature there in the English department, and my specialist field really is contemporary fiction, but as part of my current book project, which is on ideas of authenticity in post-war American culture, I've been looking a lot at the history and dissemination of conspiracy theories, which, as you'll see, is kind of my entry point into this collaborative project.
Hello, I'm Dan. I'm part of Fast Familiar. This looks like an academic and artist device. It's not. It's just I can click the things. My name is Daniel Barnard. I'm one of 3 artists who comprise Fast Familiar. Fast Familiar are an award-winning interdisciplinary collaboration. We comprise expertise in participatory theatre, game design, digital technology, neuroscience, and psychology. We make artworks and tools which are participatory, playful, and socially engaged. We create spaces to explore questions which are too complex for daily life and where audiences can rehearse better outcomes for a world where we think no decision of significance is or should be taken by an isolated individual. We're fascinated by how digital tech can enable new forms of human connection in a rapidly changing world. I am also a doctoral researcher here at the University of Sussex. So welcome to Sussex for those of you who haven't been here before. I know Victoria promised you a heat wave, and instead we've provided some traditional British weather. So what have we been collaborating on together? So a project called Forget What You Know. We've been working on it since the summer of 2023. And we've been exploring how to express the themes through multiple iterations. And we're going to share some of that journey with you now, including the version we almost made, why we didn't make it, and what we think we might be making now. What is the problem that we first started working on?
Yes, so the problem that we started with is the fact that everyone knows what happened in the Holocaust. Everybody thinks they know what happened, right? So people think 6 million Jews murdered by the evil, I'm using inverted commas, evil Nazis who are just ultimately the baddies, and that we won the war, the goodies, the Brits won the war and solved the problem. It's often seen in terms of black and white and as a kind of mythic narrative. Can you click for me, Dan? So the problem that we see is that this sort of mythic narrative of the Second World War, particularly from the British perspective, as we're all English, but also just how the Holocaust has taken on this mythic status. It means that people don't understand that the Holocaust didn't come out of nowhere and that it was a very gradual process. So a campaign of systematic dehumanisation involving laws, but also what we now call conspiracy theories, made it socially acceptable for Germans to commit atrocities against Jews even before the war. And so these criminal actions were made acceptable through a set of social conditions that Mary Fulbrook calls the bystander society. Can you click for me again, Dan? So in the project that we wanted initially to design, we wanted to try and change the way people see the Holocaust so that it's not just about blaming a group of individual perpetrators, but focusing instead on the bystander society and how that happens and what conditions need to be in place for that to happen. And ideally to counter the forces that can make bystanders into perpetrators as well. Can you click down? Thank you.
This is to me now, yeah.
Oh.
I might have clicked before you
Yeah.
spoke.
Sorry, so let me say some more. So there's a tendency to see the Holocaust as an event or something that was concentrated in a short time period, but there's actually no scholarly consensus, as I'm sure you're aware, about what the Holocaust is. So whose murders does it include? Political victims, Jewish victims, LGBT victims, Sinti and Roma, disabled people. There's no kind of consensus on what the Holocaust is or when it starts. And so my book project has been exploring these victim groups and how people at the time perceived Nazi rule as being a threat to various victim groups. And I've found that, and this is also building on Dan Stone's work, that it wasn't seen as a process of black and white at the time. Victim groups were often themselves seen as suspects. So depending on your political leanings, you might think it's acceptable to punish communists or whatever. Anti-Semitism was very prevalent outside of Germany too, and it affected the way that people responded to news about the persecution of Jews. So basically trying to forget the black and white narrative and instead see it as a messy process. That's what I've been trying to do.
So, how do we respond to that? The creative challenge we faced was how to create something that reflects this kind of reality of the Holocaust as we see it, the reality of this long process of dehumanisation to legitimise inhumane acts. So, as I said, we started collaborating in 2023, so this means that Forget What You Know version 1 was developed under a Conservative government in the UK. So that's the centre-right party in the UK. I'm doing big this. But we can talk about that in the coffee break. And we're going to come back to why that's important a bit later. So the idea for version 1 was to use pervasive game as an inoculation tactic, situating players in a counterfactual world within our own, where civil rights are being eroded in the name of security, where a group of people are being systematically deprived of their humanity. To create this immersive world, the experience draws on accounts by Jews in 1930s Germany, which described the legislation and the rumour-mongering which laid the foundations for the Holocaust. Participants follow digital clues to real-world locations where they uncover secrets about what's happening. What action will they take? And will everyone make it to the end? So Forget What You Know, in this version, the idea was it would mix immersive storytelling, a scavenger hunt, and historical fact to ask urgent questions about power and freedom, which seemed relevant right now. The idea was that participants would encounter it existing within a Black Mirror type conspiracy theory-ridden world characterised by escalating surveillance powers of the state. We were interested in reaching beyond traditional audiences for Holocaust artworks by framing this artwork in terms of privacy and civil liberties. Audiences who take part have a direct response to measures they discover, rather than encountering them through the prism of the emotional preconceptions they have associated with the Holocaust. None of this questions or undermines the horror and enormity of the Holocaust. We just wanted to create conditions where audiences become aware of how systems of knowledge which support atrocities are created and developed, rather than just reaffirming unproblematic narratives of goodies and baddies. And indeed, I might go so far as to say some British people would think that because they're British, they could just never do that sort of thing. So what actually happens in this thing? So the idea of Forget What You Know version 1 is a 2-hour adventure taking place in a town near you. In groups of 2 to 4, participants receive a mysterious request for help. They discover a message hidden in a local bookshop, inside the copy of 1984, which suggests all is not what it seems. Suddenly aware of the network of surveillance apparatus in their town, so the real network of surveillance apparatus in their town, they must avoid the cameras to liberate an unregistered mobile phone from a secret lockbox. Using this to communicate with their contacts, they find clues hidden in public buildings and geocaches. Gradually, they piece together what's going on. As their covert investigations continue, they need to use curiosity and ingenuity to uncover the next stage in the state's plan. Finally, unlocking plans for a containment centre, which they experience through augmented reality, which reveals the extent of the ambition of the government. Participants are then faced with a choice. Will they play it safe, or will they risk everything to get news out of the country about what's happening? If they do dare, there's a thrilling spy-like handover encounter, which provides a finale to the experience. So that's with a live performer at the end if they make that choice. So in summary, the audience experience is meant to be dynamic and exciting. It sort of suited people who want more than just passive consumption, so it places them at the centre of the experience, a bit like a video game, but played against a real-life backdrop. As they transition back from the story world to the real world, participants discover that the plot points they encountered were borrowed from 1930s Germany. The simulation they have experienced is how a foundation for atrocity can be built. Forget What You Know gives participants an embodied experience that places them at the centre of the story and sparks their curiosity by making them active agents. It takes them beyond common knowledge of the Holocaust and gives them a memorable experience of how systematic discrimination can be constructed. They hopefully feel unsettled, identify with the persecuted group, and take steps to join in the resistance. Now alert to contemporary parallels, they're also then able to access academic research that underlies the experience. So hopefully they're drawn into an emotional journey, they experience it as exciting and thrilling, but gradually as they uncover more of the story, it acquires more and more meaning, which is maximised through when the source material is revealed. Hopefully having a memorable and affecting experience, they'll then want to find out more, and then they access a platform with content that Dr. Pilsworth and Professor Brauner have created. To give you a bit of a flavour for the piece, we're going to share 2 audio extracts from it. Hopefully if this works. It does work. So I'll contextualise it. So these are discovered by the players about halfway through the experience, once they're starting to understand that there are some people in this society who've been assigned divergent status and are being systematically dehumanised by the state, in both state propaganda and in the treatment of these people. The players go to particular locations in the town, have an emotional resonance for each of the characters whose testimony they hear, and then they can unlock those audio accounts which they then hear on their phones. And I'll just play a couple of them now.
When talking, I was a teacher and I have 3 daughters. Hannah was always, she stood up for what she believed.
Can you hear all right at the back? Is that okay? Sam?
When she was only 5, she decided to give up eating meat because she loved animals. She was always what you'd call an activist, I suppose. The other girls, her sisters, they'd roll their eyes at her when she'd tell us we were all boiling frogs. She protested against the facial recognition cameras. She and her friends did makeup to confuse the cameras. She was so creative, so brave and creative. She was 19 when she disappeared. It was after a protest. We went to the police, of course we did, and we were told not to make any more inquiries. Tim, my husband, went back every day for a month. They claimed not to know anything. 3 months after Hannah disappeared, we got the letters confirming our divergent status because of Hannah. concealment of a divergent element over a prolonged period, and providing financial support for divergent activities. Basically bringing up a child. There are letters for Tim, me, and Katie, our eldest. Tilly, our youngest, didn't get one, but we don't know if that's because she's 16. Apparently they don't always issue them until their 18th birthday, so she just has to wait. We hope that for some reason they've missed her off the list, but we won't know until she's got that hanging over her. We don't talk about it much because it's very difficult. Tim and I lost our jobs, and Katie lost her place at university. She was studying engineering in Birmingham. Katie and Hannah never got on. They were very close in age, you know how girls can be. And now Katie blames Hannah for, well, she says for wrecking her life. She says that Hannah was selfish for doing what she did, but she didn't think about how it would affect the rest of us. I don't think that. I don't blame Hannah for a moment. She was standing up for what she thought was right, for all our rights. I just feel so sorry for Katie though. She had such a bright future. And now, we try to stay positive though. We still have our house, which a lot of people like us don't. And I pray that Tilly escapes this. We're trying to send her away. I have some close friends in Scotland. If they'd adopt her and we could find some way to get her out, then maybe she'd have a chance. Because Katie's right. There's no future here for people like us.
So you're obviously going to different parts of the town to uncover these, but I'll just pay a second one. There's about 6 in the whole thing. I'll just pay you one more if you're feeling for a contrasting one.
My name is Thomas Edward Riley, and I'm 74. I hope this thing's recording. I'm not doing this twice. Any number of people could have reported me, any of the idiots on my street. They don't like me because I'm not on their WhatsApp group. I don't participate in their ridiculous street parties and flag-waving celebrations. I've got better things to do with my time than to take part in community events. Ridiculous. So one of those petty little people must have thought, oh, Mr. Riley at 77, let's report him. He hasn't painted his front door the right colour and never joins in the on-field road in bloom competition, so on and so forth. I don't think about it. I like to think people didn't know what would happen when they reported someone. Back then, or maybe they still don't. It's only once you have that divergent status that you realise and no one else was asked. People stop talking to you for their own self-preservation, I suppose. Doesn't mean I'm not angry. I knew not to contact my daughter. I managed to get word to her. I'm not going to say how. You know, I told her not to contact me. She was pregnant. My first grandchild. Should have given birth now. I don't know if it's a boy or a girl. I'll never meet them because meeting them could effectively be the end of their life. Having that divergent status is like being subhuman. I not wish or that on anyone, and at least for my grandchild. Anyway, I keep to myself. Never been much of a socialiser. I did used to enjoy going to concerts, going to the theatre occasionally. There's an 8 PM curfew for us, and we're not allowed in those buildings anyway. I was waiting for a knee operation, but when this happened, the operation was cancelled. It won't be rescheduled. That plus not being allowed to own a car or use public transport does rather limit one's movement. But somewhat hilariously, I'm not allowed to use a walking stick as an offensive weapon, apparently. Apparently I might attack someone with it. It's a good thing I like my garden. That's the main place I go when I go out. Sometimes I catch sight of a neighbour looking at me in the window. Wonder what they tell themselves, especially if they're the one who reported me. Maybe they don't see me as like them anymore. I don't deserve the rights that normal people have.
So just to give a bit of context for how those stories came out of the research, I mean, some of the things are fairly obvious, like disappearances without due process, but we also really wanted the divergent status to be something like what it might be to be given, to be identified as Jewish when many Germans didn't identify as Jews, they just became Jews under the Nuremberg laws. So the idea that it's not something you've done or necessarily how you live, but just a status that's imposed on you from outside. So that's what the divergent status was supposed to try and echo. And the way that it can have a knock-on effect. So if your husband has divergent status, then you kind of become tarred by association, or you don't want to stand up for someone who's now divergent status, because then you'll end up in the same group. And that people in that group have a loss of rights and civil liberties. So things like not being allowed to own a car or use public transport, curfews imposed. These were all measures that were imposed on Jews, particularly during the war. Even having a walking stick was something that was forbidden to Jews during the war. So those are the kinds of parallels that we were drawing on in these stories.
And just to quickly share, I think for me, coming to this and coming to the research, one thing I was really struck by is the end of the Holocaust was so horrendous that it's so dominant, I feel like, in the imagination. But actually listening to that, all those bits before were really shit. You know, and it's also worth kind of also reconnecting with that in some way, because I think sometimes those bits can be forgotten as well. Anyway, we got a really long way into creating version 1, and we were aware, however, that there was going to be a number of challenges with this project. You need a sizable team to get players started, to replace props in public locations, to monitor whether audiences are getting lost, and so on. The process of adapting the experience to each new town that it tours to is also very labour intensive, so we spent a long time making it work in Reading. But then we knew as soon as we moved to a different town, it's going to be a whole lot of work to do it again in Brighton or whatever. Finding sort of perfect locations for each element of the piece, and you also have to establish relationships with local businesses. So there's a bit where you go into a newsagents and you get a sort of a secret newspaper and stuff, and getting permission from the local authorities in the town, so on, so on, so on. It's a lot of work. And then the other question is, it's not quite clear who the audience is. You could say it would appeal to the sort of people who like escape rooms or immersive theatre, and it would if they got to do it, but it can be really tricky to engage those audiences to try something different. Like escape room people are very much like, I will tick off every escape room in the UK, and you know, aren't quite always willing to try something different. It can take a lot of marketing, there's lots of competing activities for their attention and so on. So we knew there were a lot of problems with this. And then...
And the political context also shifted. In 2024, as most people know, there was a general election held in the UK, and the incumbent Conservative government was replaced by a Labour government. So the Conservative Party were in power while we were making version 1, forget what you know, and at that time they were using quite aggressive rhetoric, stoking divisions, social divisions, including, for example, just to cite one infamous example, the project of, the failed project of trying to get asylum seekers deported to Rwanda, housing migrants on ships in very poor conditions, and so on and so forth. An example of what I refer to as aggressive rhetoric is analysed in a paper by Jordan White, who observes that in the period 2021 to 2023, the Conservative Home Secretaries Priti Patel and Suella Braverman used appeals to patriotic sentiment and disgust reflexes to rhetorically create an expanding out-group, so to stigmatise the kind of people who were regarded as, in a sense, I suppose, divergent, although obviously that's our term, not the term that was used in the political discourse at the time. So they particularly targeted asylum seekers, human rights lawyers, eco-protesters. So that out-group was kind of created and kind of expanded over the course of those years. And at the same time, the in-group, the kind of rhetorical in-group, shrank. It started, so White argues, with Brexit voters, those who voted Leave in the Brexit referendum, but then it became a kind of subset of so-called identity conservatives. So in 2024, the Conservatives lost the general election. The Labour Party, traditionally a party of the centre-left, took power. This meant that the first version of Forget What You Know that we created no longer felt quite so urgent, quite so pertinent perhaps to the political context. And since then things have got more complicated, but perhaps that's a conversation for tea break. So yeah, if you have clicked already, you're way ahead of me now. So yeah, obviously the other kind of crucial event that followed hard on that general election was the summer riots of this time last year, which were fueled to a large extent by right-wing misinformation, disinformation, conspiracy theories and so on spread on social media. We'll come on to that in more detail. But suffice to say that the problem we were tackling felt especially urgent, I think, at this point. In a sense, we felt we were witnessing the very thing that the first version of Forget What You Know had been designed to try and prevent. But actually it felt like events had overtaken us in a way, because these things were actually happening in front of our eyes. So at that point we felt that we needed to kind of pivot, really, and shift our focus. So what did this mean for what we'd made? It meant that we'd spent a year and a half creating 3 different iterations of the first kind of version of Forget What You Know, each of which I think improved on the previous one, but as Dan was saying, there were still kind of logistical problems with that version of Forget What You Know, and as I've just been suggesting, in political terms it felt as though things had moved on, and so we needed perhaps to rethink our priorities in terms of kind of who we were wanting to reach and what we were wanting to do with the project. So for now at least, that earlier version went into the bin. There is the bin, the metaphorical bin.
So we dusted ourselves off, we stiffened our upper lips like good British people, and we started again. So if version 1, in the new context we were living in, there were new problems we needed to counter. If version 1 had been all about dehumanisation, what were the new problems we needed to tackle? We thought it was an information infrastructure which allows bad actors to spread misinformation, which leads to dehumanisation and abuse of other people. Just to give some context to those of you not based in the UK, who might not have heard so much about this, on the 29th of July 2024, there was a mass stabbing of girls at a dance class in Southport to children. 3 children were killed. Following this, from 30th of July to 5th of August in 2024, far-right anti-immigration protests and riots occurred in England and Northern Ireland. The disorder included racist attacks, arson and looting. It was the largest incident of social unrest in England since 2011. The rioters attacked homes and businesses owned by immigrants. They attacked hotels housing asylum seekers, and the riots were fueled by false claims circulated by far-right groups that the perpetrator of the attack was a Muslim and an asylum seeker, neither of which were true. These false claims were seen on X millions of times. This is what we mean by an information infrastructure which allows bad actors to spread misinformation. This misinformation, which included inciting hatred against certain groups, was then amplified by far-right politicians, including Reform leader Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform UK, which is the far-right political party. Well, I'm not doing inverted commas anymore. It is the far-right political party in the UK. He attracted criticism for this video he put out, in which he suggested that there was a conspiracy to cover up the identity of the attacker. So, former head of UK counter-terrorism Neil Basu criticised Farage for questioning whether the truth was being withheld from the public. He accused Farage of inciting violence and creating conspiracy theories. The Mayor of Liverpool City Region, Steve Rotherham, accused Farage of giving legitimacy to acts of violence after he released a video in which he said that he didn't support the violence, but the protests were nothing to what could happen over the course of the next few years. In a situation where lots of people, especially young people, in a situation where many people, especially young people, get their news from social media rather than from legacy media, this is a really big problem. In 2024, the media regulator in the UK, Ofcom, announced that online platforms overtook TV channels as the most popular sources for news in the UK, according to figures which they described as a generational shift in viewing habits. So, among 16 to 24-year-olds, social media is now the dominant news source in the UK, and for 12 to 15-year-olds, TikTok is the biggest single source of news. So algorithms serve as content which gets reactions. Online, people are likely to be exposed to increasingly extreme views and acts, including misogyny, racism, and anti-Semitism. As you'll probably know, as soon as you start getting interested in any kind of conspiracy theory online, you're pretty soon going to get to anti-Semitism. So these things, this is not inevitable, right? The tech people will try and make you think this is inevitable. It is not. It is a design choice. There are lots of people who are advocating really clear alternatives, even building alternative platforms. But sadly, this is likely to get worse. As the news stories on this slide suggest, things are now getting worse rather than better. A lot of what Trump is doing in the US in terms of liberating, deregulating the tech companies means that they're stopping doing lots of things that would making things slightly less shit than they were before. So yeah, I'll just leave that slide up for you to look at and hand over to Ellen.
Right, so we decided, given that one of our issues with the first version was wondering who's the audience, we decided that the audience that really needs this intervention is young people, because young people are most active on social media and most likely to be radicalised by content that they find there. So we then decided to try to focus in on the group of teenagers aged 14 to 19, and there is data. We also have data that this is the group that we really need to reach. Could you just skip on a little bit to, particularly with the there was a fantastic study by UCL into Holocaust understanding of young people, and this is probably too small for you to see, but these are the groups. These are the numbers of people who understood, young people who understood things about the Holocaust. So the action, who understands what happened? Most people understand that. The victims, most people understand that. Perpetrators, yeah. But then time frame, scale, location, and cause are all much more hazy. So people don't understand that it took years, that it was gradual, and why it happened. And this is
the cause is the smallest. It's kind of terrifying, right? Because surely this is the thing that we really want people to understand.
Yeah, exactly. So this is then, okay, we have the structure for this kind of radicalisation, polarisation and violence, but no understanding of how those things led to the Holocaust. So the new response that we're trying to consider, it's not me, that's you.
So what was the new response? What did we try and come up with in our attempt to create something that counters these problems? So Forget What You Know version 2 is a playable immersive experience about using the lessons of history to combat disinformation and defend democracy. It takes place within the world of social media. It includes relatable characters and situations that teenagers can identify with, and it gives players the opportunity to rehearse within the safe space of the activity actions which will help them combat misinformation and hopefully dissuade others from anti-democratic behaviour like rioting. Like with version 1, the experience ends with a revelation of historical parallels with the early days of the Holocaust, which we hope will increase the impact of the experience on the players. So in this experience, players message with another person who we'll call Jay. Jay shares events that are unfolding in their family WhatsApp group. Their uncle has started posting some content from a populist right-wing group which encourages people to take violent action against democracy. Jay is concerned as they see more and more of their family adopting this position. Jay appeals to players to help them diffuse the situation, challenging misinformation, and averting the dangerous incident which is being planned and that their loved ones are being drawn into. So what actually happens? So the piece is for teenagers who are studying history or as part of their citizenship education at school. It lasts an hour. It can be accessed on a smartphone. It's fully automated, so it can be played at any time. Participants see screen recordings of messages and articles posted to the friend's family WhatsApp group. They receive messages and voice notes from the friend. They message with the friend, providing advice and assistance, so they're trying to help prevent the situation. Participants collect digital clues in order to prevent a civic disturbance, and then the materials that they receive during the piece and then at the end give them the tools to understand how dehumanisation and bad information contribute to the weakening of democracy. The experience is accompanied by a resource pack which allows teachers to then, in their lessons, explore themes further with the young people after they've had the kind of more embodied experience of playing the piece. So the fictional backdrop to the game is a government under financial pressure, struggling to balance the expectations of the right of the party while under fire from the left. There is an increasingly strong populist right wing who present themselves as outside the mainstream, who weaponise patriotism and sentimental reminiscence, and who incite hatred against all minority groups, minority inverted commas. There's a powerful and largely unregulated media across legacy media and socials, so you've got things like Fox News, things like Elon Musk, things like Twitter and X, all of which are kind of amplifying division. So it's sort of set in a near future. This is potentially a version of a Labour second term in the UK, if they get a second term. I really hope they do. It also uses disinformation and dehumanisation tactics and other plot points of the game which reflect things in 1930s Germany, which we know laid the foundations for the Holocaust.
Yeah, so in terms of political polarisation, the rise of extremism, and a sense of a loss of control, so things are happening quickly and there's a sense of, what's going to happen, we need to try and get a hold of this. And I think that kind of panic and sense of very fast change makes people very vulnerable to radicalisation and also to subscribing to conspiracy theories or choosing a scapegoat group, because that seems to offer a solution. I know that will create order in the world if I understand that there's a baddie or a group of baddies. And so that's the kind of setting that we want to try and challenge through the intervention.
So yeah, version 2.
Is this me or you?
I think it's me.
Okay.
I think it's back to me. So yeah, is it? Let me check. Yeah, I think so. So version 2 isn't really a neat parallel in the way that version 1 was. Yeah, you can do this one then.
Okay. So what feels different about this moment? Because as I've just said, there are some things that feel eerily and worryingly similar, but the differences are so it's not so much about political leaders as individual leaders like Elon Musk, who they don't need to be elected. They just need anyone can tweet or be on social and have influence. So it's not, so in that sense it's even harder to understand who the actors are, because there's so many of them are just lone individuals. So that's unlike in the 1930s, where it was kind of more political groupings. Another big difference is that we don't have armed militia right now, whereas they did in Weimar Germany. Anti-Semitism has become a very complicated topic because of current differences of opinion about what constitutes anti-Semitism, and obviously the existence of Israel today makes it very different from the situation in 1930s Germany, 1920s Germany. And I'm also anxious about thinking through the parallels with the years of Nazi rule, because I think that when you say Nazis or talk about Holocaust, immediately people go to that black and white place where it's goodies and baddies, and no one wants to be a Nazi. No one thinks I'm a Nazi. Some people do want to be Nazis, but most people don't want to be Nazis. So, but if you insist on seeing things through historical parallels, I think it can make it really difficult to grasp the complexity of the present, because it puts you in pick a side mode, and then it blinds you to seeing how complicated things are. And so I'm now anxious about trying to see what's happening today through the lens of the 1930s in Germany. So this is quite a big pivot for me in the journey that we've been on, is whereas before I was trying to get people to think about the Holocaust, I'm now almost saying, don't think about the Holocaust, let's just try and understand what's happening here. So that's where we're at with that.
Yeah, so where are we at right now today? Do we join the whole project? Maybe. What parallels, particularly around disinformation, might be useful? How can this be a project where we use what's happened in the past to avoid something similar in the future without being reductive about past, present events and processes? Or would everyone actually prefer to go on coffee break and not help us? Yeah.
Thank you for
This is where
listening.
we are.
Yes, we have some time for a few questions. I can help, or if you're happy just to field them yourselves.
We also have a stall in the
yes.
EXPO room, so if you want to think about this more and then come and talk to us later, we'd be very happy to.
Yeah, we'd be very happy to field further questions, and also listen to any ideas that you may have, because we're at kind of a bit of a crossroads in some ways, I think. Now.
Is there any questions now?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. This is great. I'm curious. Did you mention at all about any kind of testing that you've done with the different versions? It's a very interesting contrast. Whereas the first is this very hyper localized, very physical kind of thing, and the second is this very portable, very flexible kind of narrative. But did you have any chance to do any, whether informal or formal testing, and like what kind of feedback you're getting?
Yeah. So we definitely tested the first version, and we before the world changed, we got to the point where we were kind of doing testing with small groups of people we knew for things like, oh no, it takes you too long to get from A to B in Reading. We need to have although this is the perfect location for this thing, we actually need to find something that's 5 minutes further into town. All those kind of things were what we were really working on the first time. We normally work very normally work very iteratively and test things lots of times. So if we'd carried on with version 1, we'd have done then some more tests with people we didn't know so well and asked questions that were a bit less logistical and a bit more content based on what we get and not getting and so on. In terms of the new version, I should probably summarise where we're at. We have kind of a rough draft of the new version that's not complete, but it's sort of a structure. We have a partnership with JW3, which is a Jewish Cultural Centre in North West London, who are very keen on the project. But we haven't finished writing it yet or started testing it, but we would test it quite a lot. Fast Familiar have made some other things that involve chatting on a smartphone and other pieces also about disinformation. So we've done some sort of testing of the software platforms, and we have some things that we know from previous projects that will feed into the process. But once we have this version, we would then do several rounds of iterative user testing, sort of initially solving big things and then getting more and more, hopefully, stuff like tweaking stuff. But,
And we also have some funding from Reading as part of an impact acceleration fund, it's called, which we're hoping to use to kind of workshop this version with schools, with local schools. So that would be another kind of way of both kind of developing the current iteration and also testing it really.
And GWC have a quite really strong network of schools also in London, not just Jewish schools, like all sorts of different schools. We've also sort of leveraged that as well.
And there was a useful report by the Commissioner for Church or something that investigated the perspectives of minors who participated in the riots in summer 2024, and I think that could be another useful source for us in thinking about why do people end up going to these things? Actually, how much do they know about the cause or the issues when they end up chucking something at the police? You know, complicating that as well is something that I think we need to do as part of the research for it.
Then we have another question.
Thank you. I think both projects, V1, V2, sorry, but if you're German, you can't get that. Both are worthy to continue, and I see the issue of trying to be on track while we are going through fast-paced changes. But as a historian, I can take a step back and say we're always behind. Our perspective is always retrospective. So I think the major point where both things cross is the question on how do we respond to the right-wing attack of liberal democracy that we've been seeing unfolding in the last 10 to 12 years, with a high-speed acceleration in the last few months, actually. And when I look at what you've been projecting in V2, this is really going into the last 12 or maybe even 6 months, when you're mixing the riots here with what Elon Musk and the tech sphere is doing. So what I would propose is actually to clear what you want to do. Either tackle right-wing extremism in use, or going into misinformation and disinformation, because both together is going to be a highly complex issue. Maybe from my own experience, and this is more from the pragmatic side of things, my own experience is we've done with Last Seen a game that has now reached 10,000 gamers or players, somehow, because we don't really know. We only have our tracking software. What you need to do, and I think the colleagues at Neuengamme have done that brilliantly well, is you need to have a rolled-out system, how to reach schools, how to reach teachers. So you do not only need to have the product, but you need at least 1.5 years to 2 years funding to really implement the product and to get it to a stage where it's really, really used. So I kind of say, step back, make it easier, reduce the complexities. I mean, as academics, this is not what we do. But when we go outside of the processes, I'd say single out the targets, the aims of the project. Every aim, every target is really worth following up. But this would be my initial response. But I think really, yeah, everything here sounds interesting. Follow one of the links.
Thanks.
That's super helpful. Thank you. Yeah.
It's a bit like, I think artists can, like, when you make your first show, you want to put everything in your first show. And I think sometimes with a PhD, you want to do everything you've ever thought, and your PhD is like, no, this is just your PhD, and then do something else.
And I think all of us somehow have this file of texts that we have written that we want to use for a different book or for a different article, and that we never get back to again. But it's kind of the process.
Hi.
This goes very much in the same direction. First, thank you, this is really interesting. I also was sitting here and thinking maybe these are two projects. So it's a very And for me, as someone who works in historical education, this idea of like focusing on the time before, let's say 1939, 1940, and focusing on how does that came about. This was blurry, this was not black and white, perpetrators are not a monolithic thing. I really like that, and I think that's important to have some access for that. But maybe they can stay in historical education, I'm not sure, but maybe this is also something that doesn't need to be beamed into the present. Yeah, and for the other thing, this connects very much to my second thing. I think maybe we don't need parallels. Maybe it's much easier to understand Elon Musk and all this that is happening today without looking at Elon Musk and what he's doing. So, yeah.
Is anyone else anything? Yeah, you would.
If there's no further question raised, I would like to introduce one term that I keep on thinking here, and I think it makes sense here as well, and that is neighbor and neighborhood. Because you're locally what you want to do, and you want to talk about why people are turning against neighbors while other neighbors are watching. When I go back into, personally, my focus in the last 3.5 years are deportation images, and you've been talking about how a bystander society comes into being. And I have these bystanders on the images that are not talking about later on that they've been present at the deportations. But when I translate that, it is what happens in neighborhoods, between neighbors, while neighbors are watching. And I think these close relations is something that is interesting when we look at space, but also what's interesting when we look into a virtual dimension. So what happens really in between? Why are people mobilized then to go to a riot and to actually destroy territory that's part of their neighborhood? Why are they turning against neighbors? So maybe this is something where the question of past and present comes together again when we talk about neighborhood.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. When I was listening to you, I was also thinking there's a flip side to this, isn't there? Which is, neighbourhood solidarity, which we see going on in the US in LA. And of course, this response to that, the state response is, no, we don't want solidarity. So we're sending in the National Guard. I think that's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, it can work either way. You can.
The world is complex.
Anyone else? I've got just got a couple of minutes. Sorry, I'll try to just not really helpful with you moving forward. I was just really interested when you were talking about in the first project working with local authorities and local businesses. That was just interested in how you found that. Were they very interested in the idea, or did you find it difficult to get them engaged?
So we were kind of not quite at the point where we were ready to do that, because my experience is that a lot of people aren't great at imagining things that you're a bit fuzzy about. So you have to be very, very, very clear about what it is you want to do before you speak to people. I think, it's tricky because the bookshop we want to use in Reading is Waterstones, and which is a national chain. And it's harder with chain because you have to find out who the hell to speak to in the central office. And it would have been nice if it was an independent bookshop, but it's just not. It's nicer when you can go and speak to a human who can make the decision. So
we did actually. I mean, Alan went to see, and we got their consent at a local level. But again, that would only have taken us so far because actually, yes.
Then if you want to tour directly Waterstones in the country. Yeah. So that local authorities. Yeah, we've done some stuff with local authorities before. It depends on sort of safety things and so on. I think you can do it, just going through a long bureaucratic process and things like, and then there's just the logistics, like you can put a sticker with a QR code somewhere, but will somebody else come and stick there on top. So there's also just a whole load of like monitoring your thing that you then need to do. Which also, I think the other thing is, I wish we were making this project when I was 10 years younger, because then I would have been more happy running around the city, checking stickers and things like that, and I don't have to go to nursery pick up. And, there's things that it's easier to do when you're young. So I was thinking if we were going to do this, because I used to be a drama lecturer before I started my PhD. So I think I would have also mobilised my students and paid them, like the recent graduates, to be a bit more willing to do the less fun bits of this project.
Yeah, actually, just thinking back over where we come from, I think the pandemic's legacy has been important too, because when we were first designing the thing that takes place in a town, that was because people were so excited to actually go and do things in towns. And, well, at the same time, it was kind of a challenge of people have also got used to staying home. But now, kind of, that does feel like a very different world, doesn't it? And actually, we're all just much more kind of pre-COVID in terms of what we do for fun, but post-COVID in terms of how in control we feel about the world and trusting authorities and all of this stuff. It's mad, yeah.
The other thing is, I think, just to also throw in, is a friend of mine is developing a piece across the city, and Zoe Svensson, I think, has some sort of associateship here at Cambridge, but where you go and do lots of different things in town, kind of a similar piece structurally. It's not about the same kind of stuff, but she's developing it with one of the States theatres in Germany, and they just have enough money to pay all the stage managers really well to go and do this stuff, and that's just a kind of also a funding attitude that is different in different countries. And there are some benefits of UK arts funding compared to German arts funding, but there are also some disadvantages.
On a very personal note, I grew up outside Reading, so it's fascinating to hear about.
Oh yeah,
So,
yeah. We can tell you more about where it is. There's a lovely statue of the Spanish Civil War in one of the parks that was going to put something out, and then you can just bring in those emotional resonances so easily.
Do you have any other questions?
I have one sort of comment, just based on what people were talking about. Like when you shift from this hyper-local thing to this very versatile digital thing, I wonder if you did end up having any kind of focus on neighborhoods and how they relate to each other, if there isn't some way to bring some of that localness to the digital product, because something I find is like when you make that transition, sometimes there's like a personality that's lost, and like I don't know how that would work. It'd probably be a huge headache in terms of like how do you adapt it to different locations.
But they are.
I think that's something interesting to think about, is how can you make something that's that portable and flexible, but is still like responding to what, if you have it in a classroom, it can respond to that classroom's like actual neighborhood. So it's like you feel like it's contextualized.
You could do, we could maybe do something clever in how we build the code that does certain like place names and all that kind of thing that you can go find or change. Yeah, there's maybe some tech way we could do that. It's a good idea.
Well, unless there's anything else, I think that's perfectly close to the time, so thank you once again.